Yesterday, Jamie Dimon, the chairman of JP Morgan Chase, the biggest bank in America, went on Fox News and made a confession to Maria Bartiromo.
Why did it take so long for corporate America to understand that the supply chains and by the way, elected officials, Congress and the White House, how come it's taken so long to understand that we can't have other countries, particularly adversaries, making our stuff? That's important.
We should have 15 years ago.
Think about that. The man at the very center of the financial system that hollowed out American industry in the first place now says that it was a mistake and we should have seen it 15 years ago. And he's not the only one. Mark Carney is sounding like Trump. Tony Blair is asking Trump's questions. The whole rules-based order is suddenly speaking the Trump language. But if you're watching the mainstream headlines, you're not seeing any of this. You're caught up in which judge just ruled what, or the latest social media storm engineered to keep you doom scrolling. But while you're watching the outrage cycle, something bigger is happening. What the media isn't going to tell you is that Donald Trump just carried out the biggest shift in economic and strategic power of the entire post-war period. And you're not supposed to see it. But Carney, Blair, and Dimon see it, and they're scrambling. I'm Susan Kokinda, and we here at Promethean Action see it clearly because we understand what the real battlefield is, the one that President Trump is actually fighting on. So if that's your kind of fight, hit those like, share, and subscribe buttons so we can stay in touch and reach more people. Here's what I'm going to cover today. First, how Carney, Blair, and Dimon are suddenly echoing Donald Trump and scrambling to pour their old imperial wine into rebranded bottles. Second, why this administration's revival of the American system is why they've suddenly had to start talking about industry and growth. And third, why their rebrand is dead on arrival, because you cannot revive the American system on British imperial principles. So let's start with the rebrand. When your enemies start sounding like you, you've already won the battle. This week, we heard from Mark Carney and Tony Blair, two of the most notorious operatives of that rules-based post-war order. Then Jamie Dimon chimed in for good measure. So Canada's Prime Minister and the central banker's central banker, Mark Carney, was at the New York Economic Club on May 28, where he repeated his now familiar line that the rules-based order is ruptured by Donald Trump's policies and that clinging to it nostalgically is not an option. But then he launched into his new Canada Strong pitch.
So in our first year in government, we cut taxes on incomes, on capital gains, on new business investments. We introduced something called the productivity superdeduction. We're in the process of catalyzing $1 trillion of investment in Canada over the course of the next 5 years in energy, transportation, data, and defense. We've launched our most significant regulatory reforms in generations to fast-track hundreds of billions of dollars of nation-building infrastructure projects, and we're realizing our full potential as an energy superpower. Because a country that can't feed, fuel, or defend itself is not truly sovereign. Because, as well, strategic autonomy today extends to building partnerships and capabilities across AI, financial payments, space, critical minerals.
So there you have Mark Carney talking about economic sovereignty and energy and business investments in strategic minerals. It almost sounds like a discussion at a Trump cabinet meeting. But Carney isn't joining MAGA because the rest of his speech highlights all of the underlying policies of globalism: free trade, green energy, and perpetual war with Russia. Well, here's what happens when you stick with those globalist policies, however you may want to repaint them. Reuters just reported this: a surprise technical recession for Canada. And they report that Canada's economy posted a surprise contraction in the first quarter versus the year before, making it 2 straight quarters of annualized decline. That's not exactly Canada strong. But let's look at another paragon of the post-war order, the one across the pond. Tony Blair just wrote a post-mortem on Keir Starmer's epic electoral defeat in local British elections a few weeks ago. And Blair weighed in on the Labour Party debate with this very long article entitled, "The Labour Party is playing with fire over its future and the future of the country." Blair argues that the Labour Party is going to have to reassess its soft left position. He said, the government is governing from an essentially traditional labor soft left position, parked firmly in the party's comfort zone. Whether it's a leadership change or not is irrelevant if it doesn't start with a policy debate. Are we really prioritizing economic growth, essential not just for prosperity, but for social justice? If there is a slew of policies we're implementing which might restrict it, does our economy need right now the goal of clean energy or cheap energy? How do we justify adding to the welfare bill when it's already ballooning and taxes are high and getting higher, and we're told we have to increase defense spending to prepare for the possibility of war? Got all that? Tony Blair is questioning clean energy, the welfare society, and defense spending. The man who gave us new labor and the war in Iraq. So while Blair and Carney are trying to rebrand, Jamie Dimon is confessing. He's out in California at the 2026 Reagan Economic Forum, along with Scott Bessent, who we'll hear from in a minute. But in that clip we showed at the top of the show, Jamie Dimon acknowledged that outsourcing was a disaster. He also jumped on board to agree with the new Fed chairman, Kevin Warsh, on the need to reduce the Fed's balance sheet, which has been a source of almost free money for Wall Street since especially the 2008 blowout. After making those mea culpas, he waxed eloquent about the former might of the United States when we were the arsenal of democracy.
You got to read the book Freedom Forge, how the America got fully engaged after Pearl Harbor. Like we went from building almost nothing, no ships, no tanks, no aircraft. To, we built 144 aircraft carriers in 4 years. There was no car produced in America from 1943 to 1945.
Wow.
All those plants, all of them, and not just GM and Ford, all those plants were building bombers, fighters, tanks, jeeps, ships. We went from building a Liberty ship in 1 year to 2 days. And so we just got to get this machine going, and hopefully this will get it done fast enough.
The World War II mobilization was one of the few times in the 20th century that we actually used the American system. Dimon described the process, but he didn't name it by name. Because understanding of the power of the American system is what the empire does not want you to know or to use. Well, we want you to know it, and we want you to use it. So head on over to Promethean Action and subscribe to our free newsletter. The link is in the description. So these three pillars of the post-war order, a central banker turned prime minister, a former prime minister, and the most powerful banker on Wall Street, all trying to channel Donald Trump. They recognize that something very big is happening, and they're scrambling to stay relevant. Well, here's what that big thing is. Yesterday, President Trump posted this on Truth Social. Think about that. A tanker with almost 1 million barrels of American oil headed to Japan. 2 days earlier, at the televised cabinet meeting, Interior Secretary Doug Burgum put it in the context.
And of course, you mentioned Venezuela, but all that flowing to our Gulf Coast refineries is also helping to keep the price of gas down at home. So again, it's an amazing transformation. Bottom line is the center of geopolitics around energy has moved from other parts of the world to the Western Hemisphere.
So when you see that oil tanker, or when Burgum says the center of geopolitics has shifted, you're seeing the American system replace the British system in real time. And it's happening because Trump's team is consciously restoring American system principles, while it equally consciously rejects British system principles. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent gave an extraordinary speech at that same Reagan Economic Forum that Jamie Dimon was at. I'm going to walk you through a couple of key points in it. Here's the first one.
The truth is that for too long, America had been asleep. We mistook comfort for strength. We substituted efficiency for resilience and consumption as a measure of prosperity. We told ourselves that so long as goods were cheaper overseas, it did not matter whether factories went dark in Michigan, Ohio, or Pennsylvania. We assumed that supply chains would always function smoothly and adversaries would always behave responsibly, and the invisible hand would correct vulnerabilities that too few in public life had the courage to confront.
Look at what he just did. He threw the infamous invisible hand of British liberal economics out the window. It didn't protect our industries. In fact, it destroyed them. And a little later in the speech, he put it another way. He said, "We assumed the rules-based system would discipline these behaviors, only to find that in too many sectors, it accommodated them." That's a U.S. Treasury Secretary saying the pillars of the post-war free trade system, the invisible hand, or the rules-based system, not only didn't work, but accommodated the destruction of our manufacturing. So then Besant continued.
The warning lights were glaring all around us, but our political class preferred the comfort of old formulas. Cheaper was always better, offshoring was inevitable, industrial policy was unfashionable, and strategic dependence was acceptable so long as the cost remained invisible. Beneath every one of those mistakes lay a more basic failure in our philosophy. In reducing economics to consumption, we forgot production. We measured abundance at the checkout counter rather than at the factory gate.
Again, he's hitting at one of the key propaganda lines of the whole free trade system. They sold it to people by saying, you can get it cheaper if you outsource. Measure your life from the checkout counter, not the factory gate. And then Besant asserts what we abandoned and what we have to go back to.
Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of a foundational principle that previous generations understood instinctively. Economic security is national security. For a nation that cannot manufacture, mine, ship, or refine its needs gradually, cedes its strength and sovereignty to others. That is a dangerous dependency for any country. For manufacturing is more than output on a balance sheet, it is a reservoir of practical capability. Engineers and welders, tool and die makers, and logistic networks, plant managers and workers who know how to solve problems on the factory floor. But America has awakened. We are alert to the fact that a resilient economy is the foundation of a strong republic, that we can measure the health of our economy not merely by what it produces, but whom it lifts, that secure supply chains matter as much as stock indices, that productive capacity is power.
That last sentence, productive capacity is power, is the heart of the American system. Measure your economy from the Hamiltonian standpoint of the productive powers of labor. That is, our ability to transform nature, to subdue the earth, and to multiply. When that is unleashed, no amount of sloganeering by Tony Blair or Mark Carney is going to overtake that. Because it's not a slogan, it's a principle. And Scott Besant identified that on Thursday when he ran the White House press briefing. He was served up the usual sophistry by a reporter.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Appreciate it. Given how much this upcoming midterm election will hinge on the economy, what did you think about President Trump's comments in the cabinet meeting yesterday saying he didn't care about the midterms?
So you're calling President Trump a statesman? You're saying that he is taking a statesman-like position, that he has a core belief, and he believes that the most important thing is for Iran never to have a nuclear weapon. So I believe both things can be true, that we can do well in the midterms.
Besant hit it on the head. That's the key. The president is acting like a statesman. He's acting from the standpoint of what the nation and the world need, not from short-term political gain, as important as that may be. That's something that the spokesman for the establishment can't counter. They can borrow some words or slogans, but you can't fake principles, because theirs are the polar opposite of the American system's principles. So this week, three of the most powerful figures of the post-war order, Mark Carney, Tony Blair, Jamie Dimon, all stood up in public and sounded like Donald Trump. Canada strong, labor growth, America's industrial might. They're not copying Trump because they had a change of heart. They're copying him because Besant and Burgum and that tanker just showed the world that the American system is back. So while they pour their old imperial wine into new shiny bottles, Promethean action is helping build the system that replaces theirs. And if you want to be in on that fight, join us as a supporting member or a contributor. This has been your Saturday Brief. Thanks for watching.
Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at prometheanaction.com.